Close your eyes and let the modern world, with all its frantic noise and neon light, slowly fade into the background as we turn back the pages of time, nearly 1800 years, to a land cloaked in mist, myth, and the deep, heavy shadows of an empire on the brink of collapse. You find yourself standing on a high, stone terrace in the ancient city of Luoyang, just as the twilight begins to stain the sky in shades of bruised purple and faded crimson. The air is thick with the scent of wood smoke, wet earth from the nearby Yellow River, and the faint, sweet, slightly resinous aroma of pine incense burning in a forgotten courtyard down below. Listen closely, and you can hear the deep, resonant tolling of the evening bells, echoing across the endless rows of gray-tiled roofs, signaling the enforcement of the nightly curfew. It is a sound that has measured out the lives of scholars, soldiers, and emperors for generations. A sound that tells the bustling city that it is time to turn inward, to close the heavy wooden gates, to light the tallow candles, and to retreat into the private, unseen worlds that exist behind high lacquer walls and heavy silk curtains. We often think of the Three Kingdoms period as an era defined entirely by the clash of iron, the thundering of hooves across desolate plains, the strategic brilliance of generals in embroidered robes, and the tragic, fiery destruction of entire fleets on the Yangtze River. We remember the grand names: Cao Cao, Liu Bei, Zhuge Liang, Sun Quan. Names that sound like claps of thunder in the long chronicle of Chinese history. But if you look past the official court histories, if you peer through the gaps in the bamboo scrolls and read between the cold, formal lines written by imperial scribes, you will find another history altogether. It is a history written in a softer, more intimate script. A history of whispered promises in the dead of night, of clandestine meetings in moonlit plum orchards, of marriages used as deadly political chess pieces, and of the quiet, enduring human desire for warmth, touch, and companionship amidst the terrifying chaos of a world falling apart. Tonight, we will step away from the battlefields. We will leave the generals to their maps and the emperors to their cold, drafty thrones. And instead, we will explore the private chambers, the inner courtyards, and the hidden emotional landscapes of the men and women who lived, loved, and died during China's most romanticized, yet brutal age. To understand intimacy in this era, you must first understand the physical world these people inhabited. A world where privacy was both a luxury and a carefully guarded illusion. Imagine stepping off the dusty, chaotic streets of Luoyang or Chengdu and entering a traditional wealthy compound of the late Han Dynasty. You pass through a succession of courtyards, each one deeper, quieter, and more restricted than the last. The outer areas are the domain of public life, where clerks argue over grain taxes, where messengers arrive with muddy boots, and where guests are received with rigid, formal etiquette. But as you move further inward, passing through round moon gates carved from gray stone, the atmosphere shifts. The ground changes from hard-packed earth to polished stone tile, and the sound of the city fades, replaced by the gentle plop of koi fish breaking the surface of a dark pond, and the dry rustle of bamboo leaves rubbing against one another in the evening breeze. This inner sanctuary, the hugong or the inner chambers, was the domain of the family, and more specifically, the domain of women. It was a space defined by wooden screens, intricate structures of latticework, often lined with translucent silk or oiled paper. These screens did not truly block out the world. Rather, they filtered it. They allowed light to pass through in long, golden slats. They caught the fragrance of the blossoming pear trees, and they muted the voices of those outside, creating a space where a single sigh, or the soft rustle of an unfastening robe, could carry an immense, heavy significance. In these inner rooms, life moved at a different pace. slowed down by the weight of tradition and the deliberate nature of everyday actions. Consider the simple act of preparing for the evening, a ritual that you can see unfolding in your mind's eye. A young woman of noble birth sits before a low bronze mirror, its surface highly polished but casting a warm, slightly dim, amber reflection. The room is illuminated only by a few small oil lamps, shallow ceramic dishes where cotton wick floats in rapeseed oil, casting a flickering, unsteady light that makes the shadows on the wall dance and stretch. Her attendant moves with practiced quiet, removing the heavy, elaborate hairpins of jade and tortoiseshell that have weighed down her head all day, letting her long, midnight black hair fall down her back in a heavy, silk-like wave. There is a distinct scent in this room, a mixture of dried mugwort burning in a small tripod burner to keep away the summer mosquitoes, and the rich, musk-like perfume of facial powders made from ground rice and white lead. The air is warm, almost suffocatingly so, and the humidity of the central plains clings to the skin like a second garment. Every movement is deliberate, every gesture slowed by the ambient heat and the quiet solitude of the hour. It is within these dim, scented spaces that the complex dances of ancient Chinese courtship and sexuality took place. For the elite, intimacy was never a simple matter of personal inclination. It was an intricate tapestry woven from social duty, cosmic philosophy, and familial survival. The dominant philosophical framework of the age, derived from centuries of Confucian thought, viewed the relationship between husband and wife not as a union of romantic souls, but as the fundamental building block of cosmic and social order. It was the earthly manifestation of yin and yang, the complementary forces of darkness and light, softness and strength, reception and action. To maintain harmony in the household was to maintain harmony in the state, and therefore, even the most private moments between a man and a woman were burdened with a profound sense of responsibility. The bedchamber was not merely a place of recreation. It was a sacred laboratory where the vital energies of life were cultivated, balanced, and passed down to the next generation. And yet, humans remain stubbornly human, no matter how many philosophical texts are written to govern their behavior. The literature and folk songs of the late Han and early Three Kingdoms periods reveal a society that was deeply, passionately alive to the realities of physical desire and emotional longing. Consider the anonymous folk songs collected by the Music Bureau, the UFO, which give us a rare, precious glimpse into the hearts of ordinary people, away from the rigid morals of the imperial court. These songs do not speak of cosmic harmony or filial piety. They speak of the ache of separation, of the intoxicating scent of a lover's skin, and of the bittersweet joy of a secret rendezvous. One can imagine a young traveler, resting at a wayside and along the dark, winding roads of Jing province, listening to a local woman singing a melody in the distance, her voice carrying over the damp rice paddies, singing of a lover who promised to return when the wild geese flew south, but whose bed remains cold as the autumn frost begins to settle on the thatch. Let us dwell for a moment on the sensory reality of intimacy in this world. A world devoid of synthetic fabrics, modern heating, or artificial light. To touch another person in the Three Kingdoms period was to interact with a specific universe of textures and temperatures. For the wealthy, there was the incomparable sensation of high-quality silk. Smooth, cool to the initial touch, but quickly absorbing the warmth of the skin. It was a fabric that draped over the body like water, revealing form through movement and making even the slightest gesture appear fluid and seductive. Beneath the outer robes of heavy brocade, men and women wore simpler, lighter undergarments, often made of fine, UN-dyed silk or linen, known as the moshong or the shani. These garments were designed to be easily loosed, tied with simple silk cords that, when pulled, allowed the fabric to slide effortlessly from the shoulders, revealing the pale skin beneath, which was prized in ancient Chinese aesthetics for its resemblance to smooth, polished mutton fat jade. For the common people, however, the tactile world was much rougher. Their intimacy was framed by the coarse texture of homespun hemp cloth, the scratchy warmth of woven straw mats, and the smell of coarse wool and animal hides used to keep out the bitter winter winds of the north. In the cold regions of Cao Wei's territory, where the winters brought freezing winds from the Gobi Desert that howled through the cracks of mud brick houses, warmth itself was a form of intimacy. Families and lovers would huddle together on the kang, a raised brick platform heated by the exhaust from the kitchen stove. In these cramped, communal spaces, the boundaries between bodies blurred out of necessity, and the simple act of sharing skin-to-skin contact was not just an expression of affection, but a vital strategy for survival against the encroaching frost. But whether in a palace of marble and lacquer or a hovel of mud and thatch, the shadow of war was the great, defining presence in every bedchamber of the era. The Three Kingdoms period was a time of catastrophic population decline, caused not only by spectacular battles but by the systemic collapse of agriculture, the spread of devastating plagues, and the continuous, forced conscription of young men. This reality cast a profound, melancholic pall over every romantic union. When a man and a woman lay together in the quiet hours of the night, they did so with the acute, agonizing awareness that their time together might be incredibly brief. A sudden roll of drums from the city walls, the arrival of a local magistrate bearing a conscription scroll, or the distant smell of smoke from an approaching rival army could shatter their private world in an instant. This pervasive sense of transience, this feeling that life was as fleeting as the morning dew on a lotus leaf, fundamentally altered how people experienced intimacy. It bred a kind of desperate, intense passion, a need to find solace and meaning in the present moment because the future was an abyss of uncertainty. We see this beautifully reflected in the poetry of the Genin era, a literary movement spearheaded by Cao Cao and his sons, Cao Pai and Cao Ji. These men were warlords and politicians, yes, but they were also deeply sensitive poets who lived with the constant presence of death. Their verses are filled with a profound sense of melancholy, a recurring lamentation over the brevity of youth, the fading of beauty, and the inevitability of separation. Imagine Cao Pai, the future emperor of Wei, sitting in his private study late at night, the wind rattling the wooden lattices of his pavilion in Yi City. He writes of a woman left behind in the south, imagining her looking out at the same moon, her bed empty, her heart heavy with a grief that cannot be spoken. The poem is not just a literary exercise. It is a reflection of the collective trauma of a generation, an acknowledgement that behind every army marching off to war, there was a trail of broken homes, cold beds, and women who would spend the rest of their lives mourning the ghosts of men they had once held in the dark. Let us look closer at the institutional structures that governed intimacy during this time, specifically within the courts of the competing warlords. In the palace of Cao Cao, a man known as much for his voracious appetite for women as for his military genius, intimacy was thoroughly intertwined with power, patronage, and political strategy. Cao Cao's harem was not merely a collection of concubines kept for pleasure. It was a complex diplomatic network. When he defeated a rival warlord, such as the proud Zhang Xiu or the wealthy Yuan Shao, he did not simply seize their lands and treasuries. He frequently took their wives, widows, and daughters into his own household. To modern eyes, this practice appears brutal and purely exploitative, and in many ways, it certainly was. But in the context of the Three Kingdoms, it carried a deeper, more ambiguous layer of meaning. For a conquered woman, being taken into the victor's harem was often her only path to physical survival and the protection of her remaining children. It was a strange, fraught transition, moving from the bed of a defeated husband to the bed of his conqueror. Imagine the psychological complexity of those first nights. The silence in the chamber, the scent of an unfamiliar man, the knowledge that this individual held the power of life and death over everyone you loved. Intimacy in these circumstances became a weapon, a shield, and a deeply complicated performance. A woman had to use her wit, her grace, and her physical charms to secure a position of favor, not out of vanity, but out of a desperate need to guarantee her own safety and the future of her lineage. Cao Cao himself seemed to understand this fragile dynamic. In his final testament, written as he lay dying in Luoyang in the year 220, he did not speak grandly of his conquests or his political legacy. Instead, his thoughts turned to the women of his inner chambers, the concubines and entertainers who had peopled his private world. He gave specific instructions that they should not be mistreated or cast out. He ordered that they be allowed to remain in the Bronze Sparrow Pavilion, that they be provided with silk and incense, and that they earn a living by making silk ribbons and shoes. It is a remarkably intimate, human detail from a man who had spent his life wading through rivers of blood, a suggestion that in the twilight of his life, the memories that comforted him were not the flags of defeated enemies, but the soft voices and gentle presences of the women who had shared his nights. As we journey further south, away from the dry, windswept plains of the north, across the rugged Qinling Mountains and down into the lush, fertile basin of Jing Province and the misty realm of Wu, the character of intimacy changes, shifting with the landscape and the climate. In the south, water is the dominant element. The great Yangtze River and its countless tributaries form the highways of life, and the air is perpetually damp, heavy, and redolent with the smell of lotus blooms, wet reeds, and river silt. The architecture is more open, designed to catch the fleeting river breezes. The pavilions are raised on wooden stilts over lakes and canals, and the sound of water lapping against the wood is the permanent soundtrack to every human interaction. In this watery world, romance and intimacy were often associated with the river itself. The folk traditions of Wu are rich with tales of river goddesses, ethereal beings who lured lonely travelers into the misty reeds with their enchanting songs, and of handsome boatmen who wooed village maidens beneath the shade of weeping willows. The physical reality of life in the South meant that people were more exposed to nature, and perhaps slightly less bound by the rigid, formal decorum of the northern scholar bureaucrats. The clothes were lighter, made of fine gossamer silk or cool rami linen, and the boundaries between public and private life were more porous. It was in this southern realm that one of the most famous and tragic, romantic legends of the era unfolded. The story of the two Qiaos, Diaochan and Xiao Qiao, daughters of a prominent local gentleman named Elder Qiao. They were women of legendary beauty, described in the histories as possessors of a grace that could disrupt the minds of men and cause the stars to lose their luster. When the young, charismatic warlord Sun Si, known as the Little Conqueror, and his brilliant, handsome general Zhu Yu, swept through the region, they claimed the two sisters as their brides. Sun Si took the elder sister, while Zhu Yu took the younger. On the surface, it was a match made in a storyteller's paradise. Two young, heroic conquerors marrying the two most beautiful women in the land. One can imagine the early days of their unions, spent in the luxurious, waterside villas of the South. Long afternoons spent drinking rice wine on open terraces while Zhu Yu, a master musician, played the Diaochan, his fingers dancing over the silk strings, his young bride watching him from behind a fan of peacock feathers. The intimacy of those days must have felt enchanted. A brief, golden interlude far removed from the dust and blood of the northern campaigns. But history is rarely a fairy tale. Sun Si was assassinated just a few years later, leaving Diaochan a young widow in a court filled with intrigue and danger. Zhu Yu lived longer, achieving immortal fame by masterminding the defeat of Cao Cao at the Battle of Red Cliffs. But he too died young, succumbing to illness at the age of 36. Xiao Qiao was left to mourn him in the long, damp winters of Wu, her remaining decades spent in the quiet solitude of her chambers, her beauty fading like a flower pressed between the pages of an old scroll. Their stories remind us that in the Three Kingdoms period, even the most brilliant, passionate loves were fragile things, easily crushed by the relentless gears of war and disease. Let us pause for a moment and imagine the physical spaces where these southern romances unfolded. Picture a private boat, a covered pleasure barge drifting slowly along a secluded creek near the city of Jianye. The sun has just set, leaving a faint pink glow along the horizon that reflects perfectly on the still, dark water. The air is heavy with the scent of wild jasmine and the earthy smell of the riverbanks. Inside the small cabin, a single oil lamp burns, its light filtered through a screen of green gauze. A man and a woman sit close together on a low mat of woven rushes, their fingers intertwined. They speak in low whispers, their voices mingling with the steady, rhythmic dip of the oarsman's paddle at the stern. For a few hours, the river isolates them from the world. There are no kingdoms here. No Wei, no Shu, no Wu. There's only the warmth of skin, the breath shared between lips, and the slow, eternal movement of the water carrying them into the dark. As we look deeper into the social fabric of the time, we must also consider the lives of those who were completely marginalized, whose intimacy was not a matter of choice or political strategy, but a commodity to be bought, sold, and traded. The institutionalized comfort women, the camp followers, and the palace entertainers. In an era when entire cities were depopulated, thousands of women found themselves displaced, separated from their families and left with no means of support. Many were forced into the service of the armies, traveling with the baggage trains across the length and breadth of China. Their experience of intimacy was a dark, fractured mirror of the romantic ideals found in poetry. It was an intimacy defined by the cold walls of a military tent, the smell of sweat, iron, and stale wine, and the terrifying anonymity of a succession of men who might not survive the next day's battle. And yet, even in these bleak circumstances, human tenderness could still manifest. One can find records of soldiers who formed deep, lasting bonds with these camp followers. Men who used their meager pay to buy a woman's freedom, or who carried a token of her affection, a simple braided cord of red silk, into battle. Hidden beneath their iron breastplates, it is a reminder that the need for connection is a stubborn, unyielding thing, capable of taking root in the least hospitable soil. Now, let the image of the river barge fade, as we turn our thoughts back to the grand palaces, where intimacy was often a dangerous, high-stakes game of survival. Let us consider the legendary figure of Diaochan. Though her story is heavily embroidered by later novelists, she represents a very real type of woman who existed in the shadows of the Han court. The Jiaran, the beautiful agent used to disrupt the alliances of powerful men. According to the legend, she was an orphan taken in by the court official Wang Yun, who saw in her incredible beauty and grace a weapon capable of destroying the tyrant Dong Erwa. The plan was simple yet terrifyingly complex. Diaochan was promised to Dong Erwa's fiercest warrior and adopted son, Lu Biyu, but was then secretly presented to Dong Erwa himself. She was thrust into a den of wolves, forced to perform intimacy with two dangerous, volatile men, alternating between them, using her body, her tears, and her whispers to sow the seeds of jealousy and hatred between father and son. Imagine the immense psychological burden borne by such a woman. Every embrace was a calculated risk. Every word spoken in the privacy of the bedchamber had to be carefully weighed for its political effect. When she lay with Dong Erwa, a man described as obese, cruel, and prone to violent rages, she had to feign desire and devotion, all while keeping her true purpose hidden deep within her heart. And when she met Lu Bu in the moonlit gardens of the palace, she had to stoke his passion and his resentment, making him believe that she was a helpless maiden trapped in a nightmare, waiting only for his sword to rescue her. This was intimacy stripped of all innocence, transformed into a precision instrument of political assassination. It succeeded. Lu Bu slew his foster father in the imperial court, but Diaochan herself vanished from the pages of history, swallowed up by the very chaos she had helped unleash. Her tale, whether fact or folklore, highlights the profound danger that accompanied beauty and intimacy in an age where power was absolute and life was cheap. As the night deepens, and the candles in our imagination burn down to their pools of melted tallow, let us reflect on the enduring mystery of these ancient lives. The men and women of the Three Kingdoms period are long gone. Their palaces have returned to the dust. Their silks have rotted away in forgotten tombs, and the letters they wrote to one another on fragile strips of bamboo have largely disintegrated into the earth. What remains are the fragments, the echoes, the poems and the folk songs that have managed to survive the long, destructive march of centuries. When you listen to these echoes, you realize that despite the vast gulf of time, despite the radically different social structures and moral codes that governed their world, their experience of intimacy was fundamentally no different from our own. They felt the same sudden, intoxicating rush of attraction, the same agonizing ache of unrequited love, the same deep, comforting warmth of a long-term partnership, and the same shattering grief when death or distance tore them apart. They were human beings caught in a historical hurricane, finding in each other's arms a temporary sanctuary from the storm. Let your breathing slow down now, matching the slow, rhythmic cadence of this ancient history. Feel the coolness of the night air, just as a scholar in Luoyang might have felt it through his wooden shutters. Let the images of misty rivers, dimly lit pavilions, and the soft rustle of silk wash over your mind, soothing away the tensions of the day. The past is a quiet place now. Its battles are over. Its heartaches have ended, and all its secret whispers are safely locked away in the keeping of the earth. Rest your mind. Let yourself drift, as we prepare to journey deeper into the hidden chambers of this lost world. In the hours that lie ahead, Part 2, The Crimson Chamber and the Weight of Imperial Alliances. Now, let yourself sink even deeper into the quiet stillness of the night, as the heavy wooden gates of Luoyang remain closed, and the silver light of the moon climbs higher into the velvet sky. We leave the misty riverbanks of the south and the quiet dressing rooms of noble maidens, to venture into a space where intimacy was not a sanctuary, but a battlefield. The grand, echoing halls of imperial diplomacy. Imagine stepping through a massive archway of dark lacquer and gold, where the air is cool and dry, carrying the faint, sharp tang of metallic ink and the heavy, sweet scent of burning sandalwood. This is the world of the political marriage, a realm where the union of two bodies was used to seal treaties, delay invasions, or lay deadly traps for unsuspecting rivals. In the Three Kingdoms period, a daughter or a sister was often the most valuable currency a warlord possessed, and the bridal chamber was frequently guarded not by gentle handmaidens, but by men with drawn swords and cold eyes. You find yourself standing in the great city of Jingju, a strategic prize that has changed hands so many times it seems to weep with the blood of its defenders. The year is 209, and a strange, uneasy alliance has been struck between the veteran warlord Liu Bei, a man who has spent his entire life running from defeat, yet carrying the proud blood of the imperial house, and the young, ambitious Sun Quan, the ruler of the southern realm of Wu, to cement this fragile pact against their mutual enemy, Cao Cao. Sun Quan has offered his younger sister, Lady Sun, in marriage to Liu Bei. But this is no ordinary wedding. It is a dangerous game of chess played with human flesh, where every smile hides a dagger, and every embrace is calculated to steal a kingdom. Let us look through the eyes of Liu Bei as he approaches the bridal chamber on his wedding night. He is an old soldier. His skin is weathered by the sun of a dozen provinces. His hands are calloused from the grip of his sword, and his mind is a knotted web of suspicion. As he steps across the high wooden threshold into the room, decorated in the traditional bridal crimson and gold, his breath catches in his throat. There are no soft melodies playing, no timid whispers of a young girl waiting on the bed of silk. Instead, the room is illuminated by the harsh, flickering glare of dozens of tall tallow candles, and standing in two straight lines along the lacquer walls are 100 handmaidens, each one clad in dark, functional leather armor, and each one holding a naked, gleaming bronze sword. The ring of steel against steel echoes softly as they shift their stance, their eyes fixed coldly on the aging general. Imagine the texture of that moment, the absolute tension that fills the warm air, making the breath short and the heart hammer against the ribs. Lady Sun herself sits at the far end of the chamber, beneath a canopy of deep red silk embroidered with golden phoenixes. She does not wear the submissive, downcast expression expected of a Han Dynasty bride. She is a daughter of the South, raised on the backs of war galleys, a woman who loved the sound of archery practice more than the strumming of the Diaochan. She wears a tunic of fine scarlet silk, but beneath it, the unmistakable outline of a silver corselet catches the candlelight. Her eyes are bright, fierce, and entirely unyielding. For Liu Bei. For Liu Bei. Stepping into this bed was more terrifying than charging into the thick of Cao Cao's cavalry at Changban. To touch this woman, to find intimacy with her, was to dance on the edge of a sword. This weaponized marriage represents the ultimate subversion of intimacy. The most private act of human life, the coming together of a man and a woman in the dark, becomes a theater of espionage. Every word whispered between them under the heavy silk quilts was recorded, or at least suspected of being recorded. Did she whisper words of affection, or was she trying to worm secrets from his mind? Secrets about his troop movements, his general's loyalties, or his plans for the western lands of Shu. And when he looked down at her face in the pale morning light filtering through the red gauze curtains, did he see a wife? Or did he see the sister of his fiercest rival? A woman who could easily slide a hairpin between his ribs while he slept? The histories tell us that Liu Bei never felt safe in his own home during those years. He built a separate residence for Lady Sun and her armed entourage, a veritable fortress within his city, because the atmosphere of suspicion was too heavy to bear. Yet, within this terrifying dynamic, there must have been moments of a different kind of intensity, an intimacy born of mutual respect between two predators. They were both captives of their names and their lineages, both discarded pieces in a game played by their brothers and advisors. One can imagine a night when the guards were dismissed, when the swords were laid upon the lacquer tables, and these two fierce spirits looked at one another in the quiet dark, finding a strange, lonely comfort in the realization that they were the only two people in the province who understood the terrifying weight of their positions. But the alliance was destined to shatter, as all alliances did in that fractured age. Within a few years, Sun Quan sent a secret fleet up the river to bring his sister home, using her departure to strike a blow against Liu Bei's prestige. Lady Sun vanished back into the mists of the south, leaving behind an empty crimson chamber and a legacy of whispers. It is said that when she received the false news years later that Liu Bei had died in his western campaign, she drove her carriage down to the banks of the Yangtze River, looked out over the gray, rushing waters toward the land where she had once been a bride, and threw herself into the current, choosing the cold embrace of the river over a life spent as a political relic. Her story reminds us that behind the grand tapestry of the three kingdoms, the threads are stained with the quiet, unwritten tragedies of women who were loved only for the kingdoms they could buy. Let us drift away from the dramatic courts of Wu and Shu, and return to the north, to the city of Yi, where another kind of structural intimacy was being forged within the household of the Cao family. The sons of Cao Cao, Cao Pai and Cao Ji, were locked in a bitter, subterranean struggle for their father's inheritance. It was a war fought not with spears, but with poems, dynamic court appearances, and the favor of the scholars. But at the dark center of this brotherly feud was a woman whose beauty became a curse. Lady Jin. Imagine the cold, crystalline winters of the northern plains. The snow falls in thick, silent flakes, blanketing the heavy-tiled roofs of Yi City in a shroud of pure white. Inside the palace, the floors are covered with thick, wool carpets imported from the western nomads, and large bronze braziers filled with glowing charcoal throw a fierce, dry heat into the rooms. Lady Jin sits by a window, watching the snow drift down into the courtyard. She was originally the wife of Yuan Shi, the son of Cao Cao's great rival Yuan Shao. When Cao Cao's forces stormed the city after a long, brutal siege, the young Cao Pai rushed into the Yuan household, his sword dripping with the blood of her kinsman. The records paint a vivid, cinematic picture of that feist encounter. Lady Jin was hiding in a corner, her face buried in her mother-in-law's lap, her hair disheveled and covered in dust. Cao Pai, full of the arrogance of victory, ordered her face to be lifted. He took a damp cloth and gently wiped the grime and tears from her skin, revealing a countenance so flawlessly beautiful, so serene and ethereal, that the young warrior dropped his sword. He was utterly captivated, not just by her form, but by the profound, sorrowful dignity she maintained in the face of ruin. He claimed her for himself, and for a time, she became the center of his world, the muse for his poetry and the mother of his heir. Yet, intimacy born from the ashes of conquest is a fragile, haunted thing. Lady Jin's life in the Cao household was never free from the ghosts of her past. Every time Cao Pai held her, did he remember that she had once belonged to the family his father had systematically destroyed? And did she, in the quiet hours of the night, look at the man sleeping beside her and see the face of the conqueror, the man whose family had brought ruin to her world? The intimacy between them was always shadowed by power, a reminder that her survival depended entirely on her ability to maintain her beauty and her favor in a court that valued novelty above all else. To make her position even more perilous, she became the object of a forbidden, poetic devotion from Cao Pai's younger brother, the brilliant, tragic poet Cao Ji. He was a man of unchecked emotion, a romantic who poured his soul into his verses. He looked at his brother's wife and saw the embodiment of the divine, an earthly manifestation of the goddess of the Luo River. Whether their intimacy was ever physical remains one of the great, tantalizing mysteries of the era. The official histories are silent, but the poetry left behind speaks of a profound, devastating connection. Imagine Cao Ji standing by the banks of the Luo River, the autumn wind whipping his silk robes around his ankles. As he composes his famous rhapsody, he describes a goddess rising from the water, her movements as light as a startled swan, her face radiant as the morning lotus. But the language he uses is deeply, intimately human. He describes the way her garments cling to her form, the scent of her skin, and the agonizing distance that separates them. It is a poem born of a desperate, unfulfillable longing, a public declaration of a private obsession that would ultimately contribute to Lady Zhen's downfall. As Cao Pai grew older and his power became absolute, his early passion for Lady Zhen hardened into suspicion and neglect. He became infatuated with younger, more pliant concubines, women who had no ties to old regimes and who did not carry the heavy, melancholic intelligence of Lady Zhen. Left alone in her cold pavilion in East City, her beauty beginning to fade under the weight of grief and isolation, she wrote a poem of lamentation, a bitter, beautiful verse that questioned the constancy of a man's heart. The poem was her undoing. Cao Pai, interpreting her words as an insult to his imperial majesty, ordered her to commit suicide. The final intimacy of Lady Zhen's life was a horrific parody of a former glory. The histories record that when she was buried, her mouth was stuffed with rice hulls, and her long, beautiful hair was draped over her face, so that even in the afterlife, her ghost would be unable to speak her grievances or look upon the sun. It is a detail that reveals the terrifying undercurrent of cruelty that ran through the elite households of the era. Intimacy could elevate a woman to the heights of imperial splendor, but the moment that intimacy soured, it could transform into a violence so total that it sought to erase her very soul from eternity. Let us breathe out slowly, and allow the heavy, tragic air of the northern palaces to clear from our minds. As you listen to the rhythmic cadence of these words, let your imagination drift to a different aspect of intimacy in this era, one that is rarely spoken of in the grand historical epics, but which formed the daily reality for the vast majority of the population. The physical culture of health, longevity, and the esoteric practices of the bedchamber, known as Fangzongshu, or the arts of the inner chamber. During the late Han and Three Kingdoms period, sexuality was not viewed through a lens of sin or moral shame. Rather, it was understood as a branch of medicine and a path toward spiritual cultivation. Scholars and Daoist sages believed that the human body was a microcosm of the universe, and that the sexual act was the ultimate opportunity to harmonize the vital energies of yin and yang within oneself. These practices were not restricted to secretive cults. They were studied by the highest echelons of society. Cao Cao himself was known to have invited prominent Daoist masters to his court, men like Zhuo Xi and Hua Tuo, to teach him the methods of preserving his qi, his life force, through controlled intimacy. Imagine a quiet room in a scholar's estate, far from the noise of the political courts. The floor is laid with clean mats of fragrant straw, and a single bronze censer shaped like a mountain peak sends thin, winding curls of blue smoke into the air. On a low wooden table sits a manual written on silk scrolls, illustrated with delicate, line-drawn diagrams. These manuals did not treat sex as an act of wild abandonment, but as a highly disciplined, meditative ritual. They prescribed specific breathing exercises, precise timings tied to the seasons and the phases of the moon, and techniques for retaining the vital fluids to nourish the brain and prolong life. For the men and women who practiced these arts, intimacy was an act of profound mindfulness. It required a deep, mutual awareness of each other's bodies and emotional states. A man had to learn to read the subtle signs of his partner's arousal, the changing rhythm of her breath, the temperature of her skin, the movement of her eyes, not just for her pleasure, but because her fulfillment was essential to the generation of the high quality and energy that he sought to absorb. In a world where life was so brutally short, where disease and war could cut a person down in their prime, these practices offered a sense of control, a way to use the body's natural capacity for pleasure to build a fortress of health against the hostile world outside. There is a dry, subtle wit hidden within these ancient medical texts. The authors often compare the management of sexual energy to the management of a kingdom. warning that a ruler who loses control of his passions in the bedchamber will inevitably lose control of his provinces. They advise against intimacy during times of great thunder, heavy rain, or emotional turmoil, suggesting that the chaos of the macrocosm will infect the child conceived during such moments. One can imagine a young couple, huddled together in a small room during a summer monsoon, listening to the thunder crack over the fields, smiling at each other in the dim light as they decide to heed the ancient wisdom, choosing to simply hold one another in the dark, letting the storm rage outside while they remain safe and quiet within the circle of each other's arms. Let your own body find that same sense of safety now. Allow your muscles to loosen, your shoulders to drop, and your breath to settle into a deep, easy rhythm. You are far removed from the dangers of the three kingdoms, far from the sword-guarded rooms of Jingju and the tragic pavilions of Yi City. The political marriages have all dissolved into history. The rival warlords are nothing but dust beneath the earth, and the ancient manuals of longevity are just curious artifacts in modern libraries. But the essence of what they sought, the human connection, the balancing of warmth against the cold, the quiet sanctuary found in the presence of another, remains completely unchanged. As the night continues to deepen, let these thoughts drift through your mind like the smoke from an ancient incense burner. Soft, comforting, and infinitely peaceful. We will rest here for a short while, in the quiet spaces between the chapters of history, before we venture out again, into the next corner of this vast, forgotten world. Part 3. The Flute at the Mountain Pass and Forbidden Whispers. Now, let the snow-covered pavilions of the north fade away, into the deep, indigo twilight of memory, as we journey together into the wild, untamed borderlands of the Empire, far from the suffocating etiquette of the imperial courts and the dangerous games of warlords. You find yourself walking along a narrow, rocky path in the rugged Qinling Mountains, the great natural wall that separates the northern kingdom of Wei from the isolated, misty river valleys of Shuhan in the southwest. The air here is thin, sharp, and incredibly clean, carrying the resinous scent of ancient pines, the damp, mussy smell of hidden ravines, and the cold, mineral breath of stone cliffs that have stood since the beginning of time. It is late autumn, and the mountain winds are beginning to carry the first bitter warnings of the coming winter, rustling through the dry, golden ferns and sending flurries of scarlet maple leaves dancing across the path. Listen carefully, and through the vast, echoing silence of the canyons, you can hear a sound that seems to rise from the earth itself. The distant, melancholy notes of a xiao, a traditional vertical bamboo flute. The melody is slow, plaintive, and infinitely lonely. Drifting through the mountain passes like a spirit seeking a home. It is a song of exile, a song that speaks of the deep, unyielding ache of the heart when it is separated from everything it knows and loves by hundreds of miles of treacherous terrain. In this harsh, mountainous world, intimacy took on a different character altogether. Stripped of the luxury of silk screens and bronze mirrors, it became a raw, desperate effort to find comfort in human warmth in a wilderness that felt entirely indifferent to the survival of men. Imagine a remote military outpost clinging to the side of a sheer cliff. A small fort built of rough-hewn pine logs and dry stone, guarding a strategic pass that connects the two warring realms. This is a place where young conscripts are sent to spend years of their lives. Men pulled from their family farms in the fertile plains, given a bronze spear and a heavy iron breastplate, and told to watch the horizon for enemies that rarely come. For these soldiers, the physical reality of life was defined by grueling labor, the freezing cold of mountain nights, and an overwhelming, crushing sense of isolation. But if you climb the wooden watchtower in the dead of night, when the campfires down below have burned down to gray ash and the wind howls through the log palisades, You might notice a small, faint light glowing from a low sod hut tucked behind the stables. Step closer, and you will smell the rich, pungent scent of boiling mutton broth, wild garlic, and the sour, intoxicating aroma of cheap millet wine. Inside, huddled around a small stone hearth, sits a soldier and a local woman from one of the mountain tribes. Their union is entirely unrecognized by the formal laws of the Han Dynasty. She does not speak his language perfectly. Her words are a mixture of regional dialects and broken court Chinese, and he knows nothing of the complex customs of her people. Yet, as they sit together on a rough blanket made of coarse goat hair, the distance between their worlds vanishes. Look at the way his calloused, frostbitten hand wraps around her smaller, darker fingers, feeling the warmth of her skin against his stiff, aching joints. They do not talk of the grand strategies of Zhuge Liang or the imperial ambitions of the Sima clan. They talk in low, soft murmurs about the simple things. The behavior of the mountain goats, the track of the stars across the clear night sky, and the dream of a spring that seems so impossibly far away. In these wild borderlands, intimacy was often forbidden, or at least viewed with deep suspicion by the military commanders. The generals feared that if a soldier grew too attached to a local woman, or if he found a sense of home in the mountains, his loyalty to the state would begin to erode. He would no longer be willing to march into the fire. He would no longer see the people across the valley as enemies, but as neighbors, kinsmen, and lovers. And so, these relationships had to be conducted in the shadows, under the constant threat of discovery and punishment. Every meeting between them was a stolen moment, a brief, fragile truce in the middle of an endless war, when they lay together in the dark, listening to the heavy footsteps of the sentry passing just outside the thin wooden door. Their hearts beat with a terrifying, exhilarating intensity. A single cough, a sudden flash of a torch through the cracks in the wall, could mean the end of everything. This constant presence of danger gave their intimacy a sharp, desperate edge, making every touch more vivid, every whisper more precious, and every parting a small, agonizing death. Let us reflect on the deep, psychological cost of this forbidden intimacy. For it was not only the common soldiers who sought solace in the arms of the enemy. In the upper echelons of the Three Kingdoms society, political defections were common, and with these defections came extraordinary, heartbreaking disruptions to family and romantic lives. Consider the story of Xiahou Bie, a proud general of the Kingdom of Wei, whose family was deeply tied to the ruling Cao clan. When the Sima family staged a bloody coup and seized control of the Wei government, Xiahou Bie found himself marked for death. Defeated, terrified, and with no other choice, he fled across the treacherous mountain passes into the territory of his bitterest enemies, the Kingdom of Shu. Imagine the terrifying loneliness of that journey. A man who had spent his entire life fighting the forces of Shu, now forced to throw himself on their mercy. But when he arrived in Chengdu, exhausted and broken, he was received not with a prison cell, but with open arms. Why? Because of a hidden, intimate connection that crossed the battle lines. Years earlier, during chaotic border campaign, the legendary Shu general Zhong Fei had encountered a young woman in the woods. She was a daughter of the Xiahou family, Xiahou Bie's own cousin. Zhong Fei, captivated by her grace, took her as his wife. Their daughter grew up to become the Empress of Shu, the wife of the young Emperor Liu Shan. When Xiahou Bie knelt before the Shu Emperor, Liu Shan stepped down from his throne, took the old general by the hand, and pointed to his young son, saying, "This child is a grandson of the Xiahou family." In that single, extraordinary moment, the cold walls of political rivalry crumbled, replaced by the complex, enduring bonds of a family that had been forged in the secret corners of the borderlands. The intimacy of a marriage that had begun in the chaos of war became the bridge that saved a general's life. A reminder that even in the most brutal eras, the private connections between people could subvert the grand designs of empires. Let us breathe out slowly, and allow the sharp, cold air of the mountain passes to dissolve. Let your mind drift back down into the lowlands, to the quiet, secluded estates of the gentry, where another form of forbidden intimacy was taking shape. Away from the eyes of the law, the realm of the Diaochan, the rare, clandestine romances that defied the rigid system of arranged marriages. In ancient China, young men and women had almost no say in who they would wed. Marriages were negotiated by professional matchmakers and decided by the heads of families, often before the children had even reached maturity. For a young woman, the transition from her father's house to her husband's house was a profound, often terrifying leap into the unknown. She was expected to leave behind everyone she knew, to submit entirely to the will of a strange man and his mother, and to find a place in a household where she was initially viewed as an outsider. But love, as it always does, found ways to break through these iron structures. The poetry of the era is filled with references to secret signs, to messages written on silk handkerchiefs and dropped over high walls, and to brief, intoxicating encounters in the dense foliage of private gardens. Imagine a wealthy estate in the fertile lands of Shu, where the summer nights are hot, damp, and heavy with the scent of jasmine and ripening peaches. A young woman, the daughter of a prominent scholar, lies awake in her chamber. Her room is comfortable. Her bed is laid with fine linen sheets, and her windows are covered with delicate gauze to let in the cool evening air. But her mind is restless, filled with a wild, dangerous hope. She hears the soft, distinct chirp of a cricket from the bamboo grove just outside her wall, a sound that repeats 3 times in quick succession. It is the signal she has been waiting for. Moving with the stealth of a thief, she slips from her bed, her bare feet making no sound on the polished wooden floorboards. She does not put on her heavy outer robes. She wears only her thin, white inner slip, her hair loose and flowing over her shoulders. She slips through the moon gate into the dark, shadowed garden, where the fireflies are rising from the damp grass like sparks from a dying fire. There, waiting in the deep shadow of a weeping willow, is a young scribe, a man of low birth who works in her father's library. They do not dare to speak aloud. Their love is a capital offense in the eyes of family honor. Instead, they hold each other in a silence so profound that they can hear the beating of each other's hearts, feel the sensory richness of that moment, the contrast between the cool, night air and the intense, radiating heat of their skin, the smell of the damp earth beneath their feet, and the soft, breathless quality of their kisses. For a few minutes, they are the only 2 people in existence. They are completely free from the crushing weight of their society, from the expectations of their lineages, and from the war that rages beyond the city walls. But this intimacy is a dangerous luxury. If they are discovered, the consequences will be swift and merciless. She will be disgraced, cast out of her family or forced into a brutal marriage with an older man to cover the shame. He will be beaten, imprisoned, or sent to the northern frontier to die in the labor camps. Every second they spend together is a wager against fate, a reckless, beautiful assertion of their own humanity against a system that treats them as nothing more than instruments of social order. This tension between personal desire and social duty is the central theme of one of the most famous literary masterpieces of the era, the long narrative poem known as The Peacock Flies Southeast. Though its final form was compiled later, its roots lie deep in the tragic social realities of the late Han and Three Kingdoms period. It tells the story of a young couple, Liu Lanji and Zhao Zhongqing, who are deeply, passionately in love. But Zhao Zhongqing's mother conceives a bitter, irrational hatred for her daughter-in-law, and forces her son to divorce her. The poem describes their parting with an agonizing, realistic detail. They meet secretly on the road, their carriages drawing close together under the shade of a pine tree. They hold hands and weep, swearing an oath of eternal fidelity, promising that even if they are forced to marry others, they will never truly belong to anyone else. When Liu Lanji's family tries to force her into a wealthy new marriage, she walks down to the edge of a clay pond, turns her face to the north where her husband is, and steps into the water, drowning herself rather than breaking her vow. When Zhao Zhongqing hears the news, he hangs himself from a tree in his courtyard, choosing to join his bride in the quiet dark of death. It is a story that struck a deep, resonant chord in the hearts of the people of that era, because it exposed the hidden cruelties of the system. It showed that intimacy, when denied its rightful expression, could transform into a tragic, destructive force, a fire that would consume the very people who sought its warmth. The poem ends with a beautiful, mythic image. The two lovers are buried together, and from their graves grow a pair of pine trees and a pair of phoenixes, their branches and wings intertwining in the sky, singing a song of eternal love that warns future generations never to separate those who have been joined by the heart. Let your own mind find that sense of intertwining peace now. Allow the tragedies of the past to resolve into a soft, comforting quiet. You are safe in your own time, far from the cruel constraints of ancient families and the dangerous shadows of forbidden gardens. The mountain flutes have fallen silent. The secret lovers of Shu have long since turned to dust, and the high walls of the ancient estates have crumbled into the earth. But the courage they showed, the willingness to risk everything for a single touch, for a moment of genuine connection in a world defined by cold duty, remains a beautiful, enduring testament to the human spirit. As you drift closer to sleep, let the warmth of that spirit fill your thoughts, wrapping you in a sense of security and quiet rest. We will linger here in the soft twilight of the mind, letting the world go, as we prepare to turn the page to the next chapter of this ancient, whispering tale. Part 4, The Bronze Sparrow Pavilion and the Poetry of Desire. Now, let the mountain mists and the tragic echoes of the southern rivers slowly dissolve into a warm, heavy darkness, as we return to the grand heart of the northern realm, to the city of Yi, where the most ambitious architectural monument of the age stood as a testament to one man's absolute power and unyielding desires. You find yourself standing at the base of a colossal terrace, looking up at a structure that seems to touch the stars themselves. The Tongquetai, the famous bronze sparrow pavilion. The night air here is different. It is thick and rich, laden with the heavy, sweet scent of burning orchid incense, the musk of expensive cosmetics, and the sharp, clean aroma of fine rice wine that has been heated in ornate bronze vessels. It is midsummer, and a warm, breathless breeze ripples through the thousands of long, emerald-green silk banners that drape from the high wooden balconies, casting vast, rhythmic shadows across the polished stone courtyards down below. Listen closely, and through the deep stillness of the palace compound, you can hear a symphony of soft, late-night activity, the distant, ethereal strumming of a 21-string guzheng, its notes rising and falling like water splashing over smooth jade, the rhythmic, hypnotic clicking of wooden castanets, and the low, collective murmur of hundreds of handmaidens, poets, and scholars who inhabit this vertical city. This is the private sanctuary built by Cao Cao, a man who was not content with merely conquering the physical geography of China, but who sought to create an artificial paradise where art, intellect, and the most refined forms of physical intimacy could be gathered under his absolute command. Hey, high above the dusty, war-torn plains, the rules of the outside world were suspended, and intimacy was transformed into an elaborate, poetic ritual, a grand performance of cultural sophistication and sensory indulgence. Imagine climbing the grand stone staircase that leads to the central tower, each step illuminated by tall, bronze lanterns shaped like kneeling servants holding shallow dishes of burning fat. As you reach the upper pavilions, the view opens out into an endless vista of the surrounding countryside, the distant waters of the Jong River gleaming like a silver thread under the light of a crescent moon. You move past heavy, dark wooden pillars, polished to a mirror-like sheen, and step through a succession of semi-translucent gauze curtains that billow gently in the night breeze, creating a labyrinth of light and shadow where the boundaries between reality and illusion begin to blur. In these high chambers, intimacy was deeply intertwined with the literary renaissance of the Jianan era. Cao Cao and his sons did not separate the pleasures of the body from the pleasures of the mind. A night of intimacy in the Bronze Sparrow Pavilion almost always began with words. Scholars, poets, and beautiful entertainers would gather around low lacquer tables, drinking wine from heavy bronze cups, and taking turns composing verses on given themes: the beauty of the moon, the fleeting nature of youth, or the subtle fragrance of a particular blossom. A woman's worth in this environment was measured not just by the symmetry of her features, but by her quickness of wit, her ability to match a complex poetic rhyme, and the expressive grace with which she could sing the verses composed by her master. Let us look closely at the physical artifacts of intimacy that peopled these rooms. Objects that you can see arranged on the low tables and sideboards. There are small, exquisite boxes made of red lacquer, containing cosmetics of unimaginable luxury, powders made from ground seed pearls to give the skin an ethereal, moon-like luminescence, rouge made from sapphire petals imported across the Silk Road, and dye, a dark green mineral powder used by women to paint their eyebrows into the shape of distant, misty mountains or the delicate antennae of moths. To modern eyes, these practices might seem superficial, but in the late Han Dynasty, the way a woman painted her face was considered a direct expression of her inner spirit and her understanding of aesthetic harmony. Beside the cosmetic boxes sit the bedding materials, which were a far cry from the simple mats of the common people. The beds in the Bronze Sparrow Pavilion were massive, raised wooden structures, often carved with intricate designs of dragons and phoenixes, and surrounded by heavy, multi-layered canopies of brocade silk. The mattresses were stuffed with the softest down of wild geese or the fragrant, dried petals of medicinal herbs, designed to induce sweet dreams and preserve the health of the sleeper. The pillows were not soft cushions, but solid blocks of polished green jade or high-fired ceramic, carved into the shape of sleeping infants or mythical beasts. It was believed that resting one's neck against the cool surface of a jade pillow would clear the mind, cool the blood, and channel the vital energies of the body during the hours of rest and intimacy. It is within these opulent, enclosed spaces that Cao Cao sought solace from the immense burdens of his political life. He was a man surrounded by enemies, a man who slept with a dagger beneath his pillow and who famously declared that he would rather betray the world than let the world betray him. His paranoia was legendary. He had a standing rule that no guard or servant could approach his bed while he slept, under penalty of immediate execution. Yet, within the high walls of the Bronze Sparrow Pavilion, among the women he had gathered from every corner of the empire, he allowed his armor to fall away. Imagine a late-night scene in the topmost chamber of the tower. The poets have all departed. The lamps have been dimmed until they are nothing but small, orange points of light in the vast darkness. Cao Cao sits on the edge of his massive silk bed, his gray hair unbraided and falling loose over his shoulders, his face lined with the exhaustion of a lifetime of campaigns. A young concubine, Perhaps a woman taken from the household of a defeated northern rival, approaches him carrying a small lacquer tray. On it sits a bowl of warm pear soup sweetened with wild honey, a traditional remedy to soothe a weary throat. Look at the extraordinary psychological tension of this moment. This woman has every reason to hate the man sitting before her. His armies have laid waste to her homeland. His strategies have brought about the death of her kinsman. She holds in her hands an opportunity that 1,000 assassins would die for. A moment of absolute vulnerability. And yet, as she kneels on the polished floorboards and offers the bowl, she sees not the terrifying warlord of the histories, but an old, tired man whose hands tremble slightly as he reaches for the food. Intimacy in this space becomes a profound, silent negotiation, a shared acknowledgement of their mutual entrapment in the gears of history. She chooses survival and grace. He chooses trust. An incredibly rare and dangerous luxury for a tyrant. He takes her hand, not with the violence of a conqueror, but with a quiet, desperate need for human contact, and draws her into the dark safety of the silken canopy. This intersection of power, desire, and poetry is nowhere more vividly expressed than in the legend that linked the Bronze Sparrow Pavilion to the two most famous beauties of the South, Diaochan and Xiao. The story goes, heavily popularized by later storytellers and the grand verses of the poet Dumas, that one of Cao Cao's secret motivations for launching his massive invasion of the South was his desire to capture the two Qiao sisters and install them in his new pavilion at Yi City. It was said that he had even commissioned a specific poetic inscription for the tower, claiming that he wished to lock the two Qiaos in the Bronze Sparrow Pavilion to enjoy their company in his declining years. When the brilliant Eastern general Zhu Yu heard of this, his pride and his passion were ignited into a fierce, blinding fury. Xiao Qiao was his wife, the woman whose grace comforted him after his long days on the war galleys. The idea of her being taken as a prize to the north, forced to perform intimacy for the tyrant of Wei, became a powerful, emotional catalyst that united the southern leaders. The Battle of Red Cliffs, which resulted in the total destruction of Cao Cao's fleet and the permanent division of the empire, was fought not just for land or sovereignty, but in the minds of the storytellers, to defend the sanctity of a marriage and the privacy of a southern bedchamber. Though modern historians smile at the idea of an empire being divided over romance, the legend contains a deeper, symbolic truth. It shows that during the Three Kingdoms period, beauty and intimacy were never seen as separate from the grand narrative of statecraft. They were the ultimate symbols of prestige and civilizational achievement. To possess the most beautiful women of the age was to possess the mandate of culture itself, and to lose them was a sign of civilizational weakness. The Bronze Sparrow Pavilion stood not just as a house of pleasure, but as a grand statement of imperial intent, a monument that said to the rest of China, here sits the master of arts, the master of verse, and the master of desire. Let us breathe out slowly, and allow the heavy, perfumed air of the Bronze Sparrow Pavilion to drift away. Let the long silk banners stop their rustling, and let the lights of Yi City fade into a gentle, restorative darkness. Your own body can find its own pavilion of rest now, safe from the ambitions of kings and the dangerous legends of ancient beauties. The bronze sparrows have long since fallen from the eaves. The grand towers have crumbled into mounds of earth covered in wild grass, and the poems composed within those chambers are now just ink on old paper. But the essence of what they sought, the attempt to find an island of beauty and warmth in the middle of a world defined by conflict, remains a timeless, deeply human endeavor. As you drift closer to the edge of sleep, let the quiet rhythm of these words wrap around you like a protective canopy of silk, soothing away the noise of the modern world, and leaving you in a state of profound, peaceful stillness. We will rest here in the deep night of the past, before we turn our gaze to the next hidden valley of this ancient, whispering world. Part 5. The silent looms of Shu and the warmth of coarse hemp. Now, let the golden lanterns and the heavy, orchid-scented smoke of the bronze sparrow pavilion drift away, like a dream dissolving into the early morning light, as we turn our gaze toward a very different corner of the ancient landscape, far from the opulent towers of the north, and into the quiet, mist-shrouded valleys of the southwest, the kingdom of Shuhan. You find yourself standing on a low, dirt-packed terrace in a small village nestled along the banks of the Minute River. Just as the pre-dawn dampness begins to lift from the surrounding rice paddies, the air here is clean, cool, and thick with the rustic aromas of wet earth, the sharp, green scent of bamboo groves, and the pungent, comforting smell of wood smoke rising from the thatch-roofed cottages that line the muddy lanes. It is early spring, and a low, heavy fog clings to the water, blurring the outlines of the willow trees and making the entire world feel soft, muted, and entirely isolated from the grand currents of history. Listen closely, and through the quiet dripping of the morning dew from the eaves, you can hear a steady, rhythmic sound echoing from almost every cottage in the settlement. Clack-thump, clack-thump, clack-thump. It is the sound of the wooden looms, the tireless, patient heartbeat of the southern countryside. In this rural world, away from the courts of emperors and the strategic councils of generals, intimacy was not defined by poetry or political treaties, but by shared labor, by the daily, grinding effort to keep a household alive, and by the quiet, uncelebrated partnerships that formed the true foundation of the empire. While the official histories dedicate thousands of pages to the brilliant strategies of Zhuge Liang and his northern expeditions, the survival of his state depended entirely on the silent labor of the men who tilled the fields, and the women who sat before these wooden looms, weaving the famous Shu brocade that was traded across the mountains to fund the endless wars. Imagine stepping inside one of these humble dwellings, passing beneath a low lintel of woven reeds. The interior is small, dark, and simple, illuminated only by the faint, gray light filtering through a small opening in the thatched wall. The floor is made of hard-packed mud, swept clean and covered in a few places with thick mats of woven river rushes. There are no jade pillars here, no bronze incense burners or silk curtains. The only furniture is a low wooden table, a few clay storage jars for grain and salt, and in the corner, the massive, angular skeletal frame of the family loom. A woman sits on a low stool before the machine, her feet working the wooden pedals with practiced grace, her hands throwing the shuttle back and forth through the tightly strung threads of hemp and raw silk. Her movements are fluid, almost meditative, honed by years of daily repetition. Her skin is not pale like the noble women of the northern courts. It is tanned by the southern sun and roughened by the natural oils of the plants she processes. But look closely at her face in the dim light. There is a profound, quiet strength in the set of her jaw and a deep, enduring warmth in her dark eyes. Beside her stands a man, her husband, an ordinary soldier cultivator who has just returned from his morning shift on the state-managed fields. His boots are caked with heavy gray mud. His coarse hemp tunic is damp from the river fog, and his shoulders are bowed under the weight of the iron spade he carries. He does not speak grand words of affection as he enters. Such things would feel strange and artificial in this practical world. Instead, he sets down his tool, approaches the loom, and gently places his large, calloused hand on her shoulder, feeling the steady, rhythmic vibration of her body as she works. She pauses for a single moment, rests her hand over his, and smiles up at him in the quiet gloom. This is the sensory reality of intimacy for the vast majority of the population during the Three Kingdoms period. It was an intimacy framed by the coarse texture of homespun hemp cloth, the bubu, which was scratchy against the skin when new, but grew soft, pliable, and intensely comforting after years of washing and wear. For these people, physical closeness was not a luxury or a game of seduction. It was an absolute necessity for survival. In the damp, chilly winters of the Sichuan Basin, when the cold river folk seeped through the cracks in the wooden walls, a family's only defense against the frost was each other. They would sleep together on a single raised platform of earth and timber, packed close together beneath a heavy, patchwork quilt stuffed with wild cotton or dried reeds. In those dark hours, the boundaries between bodies vanished entirely out of necessity. A man held his wife, and their children curled around their feet, creating a circle of shared warmth that kept the terrifying cold of the world at bay. In these moments, the touch of skin against skin was a profound reassurance, a silent declaration that despite the plagues, the taxes, and the press gangs of the warlords, they were still still alive, and still together. Yet, even this humble, domestic peace was fragile, constantly shadowed by the insatiable demands of the state. The kingdom of Shu was the smallest of the three realms, possessing only a fraction of the population and resources of Kauwei. To maintain its independence and pursue its grand dream of restoring the Han Dynasty, it had to mobilize every available resource with a terrifying efficiency. For the common people, this meant that the state was a permanent, intrusive presence in their private lives. Every young man in the village was registered on the tax scrolls, and every year, as the spring planting season drew to a close, the village elder would arrive bearing the conscription orders. One can imagine the quiet, devastating tragedy that unfolded in these cottages when the news arrived. A young couple, married only a few seasons, who had just built their own loom and planted their first crop of beans, suddenly torn apart by the relentless machinery of war. The parting was not celebrated with grand banquets or imperial poetry. It took place at the edge of the village, where the dirt path vanished into the misty bamboo hills. The woman would hand her husband a new tunic of thick, tightly woven hemp, a garment she had spent the long winter nights preparing, her fingers aching from the coarse fibers, every thread woven with a silent prayer for his safe return. He would take the cloth, look into her eyes for what they both knew might be the last time, and turn to march toward the northern passes, joining a long, silent line of men moving toward the mountains. Left behind, the woman returned to her cottage, and the sound of the loom began again. But the rhythm was different now. Slower, heavier, carrying the immense, crushing weight of an unvoiced grief. Every throw of the shuttle was a marker of time passing. Every finished yard of cloth a reminder of his absence. The poetry of the common people, captured in the later folk traditions of the region, often speaks of this unbearable loneliness, of a woman listening to the rain on the thatched roof, her bed too large, her heart too heavy, her arms reaching out in the dark for warmth that is no longer there. But let us look beyond the tragedy, and consider the profound resilience that this domestic intimacy bred within the society. The women of Shu were not merely passive victims of war. They were the economic engine of their state. The high-quality silk and brocade they produced was so prized across China that even their enemies in the north, the Wei nobility, spent vast fortunes to smuggle it across the border. The money earned from these textiles bought the horses, the iron, and the grain that allowed the Shu armies to hold the mountain passes for decades. In a very real sense, the private labor of the bedroom and the weaving shed was a form of resistance. A woman who kept her household together, who raised her children in the absence of their father, and who kept her loom clicking through the darkest nights, was fighting her own war. She was defending the sanctity of her home and the continuity of her lineage against the chaotic forces of destruction that threatened to erase her world. Her intimacy with her craft, and her memory of her husband, became the anchor that held her steady in the middle of the historical storm. Let your own mind find that same sense of steady, anchored peace now. Allow the frantic rhythms of your own life to slow down, matching the patient, ancient cadence of the wooden loom. Feel the comfort of your own modern surroundings, the softness of your sheets, and the safety of your room. Far removed from the hard choices and the sudden separations of the ancient world, the wars of Shu have long since ended. The fields along the Minute River have been tilled by 100 generations of farmers since, and the old wooden looms have fallen into dust. But the quiet courage of those ordinary lives, the deep, wordless love that expressed itself through labor, through sacrifice, and through the stubborn maintenance of warmth in the face of absolute uncertainty, remains a beautiful, comforting light in the long chronicle of human experience. As you drift closer to the gentle shores of sleep, let that light fill your thoughts, wrapping you in a profound sense of peace and quiet rest. We will linger here in the soft morning mist of the valley, letting the world fade, as we prepare to turn our gaze to the next hidden chapter of this ancient, whispering tale. Part 6. The Shadows of the Wu Galleys and the Cold Salt of the Southern Shore. Now, let the rhythmic clicking of the village looms and the gentle mists of the Shu valleys fade away into the deep, dark blue of the southern night, as we carry your imagination down the long, rushing current of the Yangtze River, toward the vast, salt-scented horizon, where the river meets the great Eastern Sea. You find yourself standing on a high, weather-beaten wooden pier in the naval port of Xiakou, the heart of the kingdom of Wu's military power. The air here is entirely different from the landlocked plains of the north or the sheltered basins of the west. It is wild, damp, and intensely restless, carrying the sharp, briny sting of sea salt, the heavy, rich smell of pitch and pine tar used to seal the hulls of war galleys, and the cool, damp breath of the endless water. It is late autumn, and a fierce, gusty wind sweeps over the dark waves, causing the thousands of tall masts anchored in the harbor to sway and groan against their thick hemp ropes, creating a low, eerie creaking that sounds like the collective sighing of 1,000 hidden ghosts. Listen closely, and beneath the wild howling of the coastal wind, you can hear the deep, rhythmic lap of the tide hitting the stone foundations of the fortress, and the distant, muffled voices of the night watchmen pacing the high wooden decks of the flagship. This is the maritime world of the Sun family, a kingdom built not on the stable foundations of the earth, but on the shifting, unpredictable surface of the water. In this southern realm, intimacy was shaped by the constant, relentless presence of the sea and the terrible transience of a life spent aboard the war galleys. For the sailors, rowers, and marines of Wu, home was a fleeting concept, an island of brief warmth found between campaigns, and their romantic unions were defined by long, agonizing silences, by the smell of damp wool and cold salt, and by the permanent, haunting knowledge that the river that brought them together could easily become their grave. Imagine stepping onto the covered deck of a medium-sized patrol ship, a Mengchong. It's dark, lacquer-painted hull riding low in the chopping waves. You descend a narrow wooden ladder into the lower crew quarters, a cramped, suffocating space where the ceiling is so low your head brushes against the raw pine beams. The room is illuminated only by a single iron lamp swinging from an iron chain, its flame casting wild, distorted shadows across the wet wooden planks. The air down below is thick and heavy, trapped by the lack of ventilation, smelling of stale river water, dried fish, and the pungent, oily grease used to keep the bronze relics from rust. In a narrow berth at the furthest corner of the hold, tucked away from the communal sleeping mats of the other rowers, A young marine sits close to his companion, a local fisherwoman from the outer islands who has sneaked aboard before the fleet sails at dawn. They sit on a pile of rough, damp sailcloth, their bodies pressed together to shield themselves from the icy draft that blows through the oarports. There are no poetic phrases spoken here, no elegant exchanges of verse or gifts of jade. Their intimacy is expressed in the raw, silent language of the body. Look at the way she runs her fingers along the deep, jagged scar on his forearm, a souvenir from a skirmish with Cow's river scouts, and the way he buries his face in her long, dark hair, which smells of fish scales, wood smoke, and the cold salt of the sea. For these coastal people, intimacy was an act of defiance against the immense, crushing weight of the water. The life of a Wu sailor was one of constant exposure to the elements, their skin hardened by the wind, their eyes perpetually strained from looking out across the blinding glare of the river. To find another person in the dark, to hold onto a body that was warm and soft, was to remind oneself that they were still human, that they were something more than just fodder for the grand ambitions of the Han Dynasty. In this cramped, swaying berth, the terrifying vastness of the Yangtze River ceases to exist. There's only the rhythm of their breathing, matching the steady, hypnotic rocking of the ship, and the desperate warmth of their skin against the encroaching chill of the autumn night. Yet, the dawn is an absolute, unforgiving boundary. As the first faint line of cold, gray light begins to split the eastern horizon, a heavy bronze gong echoes across the harbor, shattering the quiet intimacy of the hold. The woman must leave, slipping out through the cargo port into a small wooden skiff before the officers begin their morning inspection. One can see her in a mind's eye, rowing silently away from the massive warship, her figure growing smaller and smaller against the gray expanse of the water, while her lover takes his place at the oar, his hands gripping the rough ashwood, his heart turning back toward the shore. This pattern of sudden union and long separation was the defining characteristic of intimacy in the South. The women of Wu were uniquely independent, tasked with managing the households, the fishing nets, and the local markets while their husbands were away for months or even years on distant expeditions down the coast. They were women who knew how to handle a boat, how to navigate the treacherous currents of the marshes, and how to defend their homes against the river pirates that plagued the deltas. Their love was not a fragile thing to be protected behind silk screens. It was a fierce, resilient bond that had to survive the distance of hundreds of leagues of water. Consider the quiet, unwritten tragedies that haunted the coastal villages. When a fleet returned from a campaign in the north, the entire population would gather on the stone piers of Janya, watching the great white sails round the bend of the river. For the women waiting on the shore, that moment was an agonizing calculation. They would count the ships, looking for the specific flags of their husbands' divisions, and then they would watch the wounded being carried down the wooden ramps, their hearts suspended between life and death until they saw a familiar face, or received a simple wooden tablet bearing a man's name, confirming that his body had been committed to the deep gray waters of the sea. For those who did not return, the intimacy did not end. It merely transformed into a long, permanent haunting. A widow would walk down to the wet sand at low tide, holding a small clay bowl filled with heated rice wine and a single lock of her hair. She would pour the wine into the surf, whispering his name into the sea wind, believing that the current would carry her warmth down into the cold, dark depths where he lay. It was a ritual repeated in 1,000 villages along the coast, a silent, collective mourning that stained the beauty of the southern realm with a profound, maritime melancholy. Let your own thoughts drift away from the restless harbors and the groaning masts of the Wu fleet now. Allow the cold salt air to clear from your mind, replaced by a deep, heavy sense of tranquility and safety. You are far from the dangers of the river campaigns, far from the sudden separations of the coastal ports. The war galleys of the Sun family have all rotted into the mud of the deltas. The gongs of battle have been silent for centuries, and the names of those lonely sailors have been completely forgotten by the world. But the strength they found in each other, the willingness to love and to touch in the very shadow of the abyss, remains a beautiful, comforting truth. As you sink deeper into the quiet luxury of your own bed, let the slow, rhythmic movement of the tide wash over your consciousness, soothing away the worries of the day, and leaving you in a state of absolute, peaceful rest. We will linger here on the quiet shore of the past, letting the darkness fold around you, as we prepare to return to the heart of the Empire for the next part of this long, whispering tale. Part 7. The desolate capital and the warmth of the ruins. Now, let the cold salt of the southern shores and the groaning wood of the war galleys fade away into the quiet, starlit dark, as we return to the very cradle of the Empire, to the ancient, haunted landscape of the Central Plains. You find yourself walking along a cracked, weed-grown stone road leading into the city of Chang'an, once the glorious western capital of the Han Dynasty, but now a vast, silent wilderness of blackened brick, crumbled ramparts, and forgotten tombs. The night air here carries a heavy, antique stillness, laden with the dry scent of parched earth, the bitter aroma of wild wormwood growing through the floors of abandoned palaces, and the faint, cool breath of the autumn wind sweeping across the desolate terraces. It is late winter, and a pale, silver frost has begun to settle over the shattered tiles and broken stone pillars, making the ruins gleam like bone under the light of a vast, indifferent moon. Listen closely, and through the deep, echoing emptiness of the old imperial district, you can hear only the lonely cry of a nighthawk circling high above the collapsed roofs, and the dry rustle of dead grass scratching against the stone foundations of the throne halls. This is a world defined by the catastrophic aftermath of the tyrant Dong Ao's retreat, a city that was systematically looted, burned, and abandoned, leaving behind a ghost landscape where tens of thousands of ordinary people had to find a way to rebuild their lives from the ashes. In this desolate capital, away from the luxury of active courts or the stability of rural villages, intimacy underwent its most radical transformation. It was stripped of all social pretense, all ritual elegance, and all material comfort, becoming a fierce, primal struggle to salvage a shred of human dignity and tenderness from the literal wreckage of civilization. Imagine seeking shelter from the freezing night wind within the hollow shell of a former imperial villa. You step through a collapsed gateway where the charred remnants of heavy cedar doors still hang from their twisted bronze hinges. The grand reception halls are gone, their painted ceilings long since fallen into mounds of ash and broken tile. But if you descend into the subterranean storage cellars, passing down narrow stone steps where the moisture has frozen into thin sheets of ice, you will find a small, hidden pocket of life. A family of survivors, a scholar who once copied imperial scrolls and his wife, have made this dark, earthen vault their sanctuary. The cellar is illuminated by nothing more than a tiny fire built from pieces of broken, lacquered palace furniture, the ornate red paint blistering and spitting as it burns, casting a warm, unsteady orange glow against the raw date walls. There are no cushions or quilts left to them. They sit on a bed of dried straw gathered from the overgrown imperial gardens, wrapped together in a single, tattered robe of quilted wool. Look at the profound, quiet intimacy of their posture. The scholar's hands, once smooth and meant only for handling camel hair brushes and fine silk scrolls, are now rough, split by the winter cold, and blackened by the soot of the ruins. Yet, as he sits beside his wife, he gently combs his fingers through her tangled hair, removing the small bits of dried straw and dust with an infinite, heartbreaking tenderness. For these survivors, intimacy was the only currency that had not lost its value. The imperial coins of bronze and gold were useless now. The grain stores were empty, and the laws of the court had vanished along with the emperor. The only thing that remained real, the only thing that kept the creeping despair of the wasteland from freezing their hearts entirely, was the physical presence of another human being in this dark cellar, as they share a meager bowl of boiled wild roots and heated river water. Their touch is an act of profound remembrance. Every kiss, every quiet pressure of their hands, is a declaration that they are not ghosts, that they are still the keepers of a civilization, even if that civilization now exists only within the small circle of their shared warmth. There's a deep, quiet irony hidden within the ruins of Chang'an. The grand structures that were built to last for generations, the halls of state, the treasuries, the ancestral temples, proved to be completely fragile, easily consumed by the fires of political ambition. But the most fragile thing of all, the quiet, emotional bond between a man and a woman, the simple human need for companionship, turned out to be the most resilient. It survived the armies, it survived the fires, and it took root in the very dirt beneath the collapsed thrones. Yet, the threat of violence was never entirely absent, even in the deep shadows of the ruins. Bandits, remnants of defeated armies, and roving press gangs frequently combed the dead cities, looking for anything left to steal or human labor to exploit. One can imagine the terrifying tension of a night when footsteps are heard echoing through the courtyard above. The fire in the cellar is instantly smothered with date, plunging the couple into absolute, suffocating darkness. They hold each other in a frantic, breathless embrace, their muscles locked, their hearts hammering against each other's ribs with a terrifying violence. In those minutes, their intimacy becomes a shared shield, a silent pact to live or die together, until the footsteps fade into the distance, and the quiet safety of the night returns. As the night deepens, and the frost on the stone pillars thickens under the silver moonlight, let the images of the desolate capital slowly dissolve. Allow your mind to find that same sense of survival and profound resilience. You are safe in your own time, far from the ruined cities and the terrifying shadows of ancient wars. The fires of Chang'an have been cold for nearly 2,000 years. The broken palaces have long since been buried beneath modern cities, and the survivors have found their eternal rest. But the lesson of their lives, that love and human tenderness can find a way to flourish even in the absolute absence of material comfort, that the small sanctuary of a shared embrace is more enduring than the grandest empire, remains a beautiful, comforting truth. As you close your eyes and let yourself drift closer to sleep, let that sense of quiet durability wrap around you, soothing away the noises of the modern world, and leaving you in a state of absolute, peaceful rest. We will linger here in the quiet stillness of the ancient ruins, letting the darkness fold around you, as we prepare to enter the final chapter of this long, whispering tale. Part 8, The Twilight of the Three Kingdoms and the Eternal Stream. Now, let the silver frost on the shattered pillars of Chang'an and the warm orange glow of the subterranean fires slowly fade into the final, deepest indigo of the night. As we carry your imagination forward through the decades, past the deaths of the great warlords, past the crumbling of the old alliances, to the very twilight of the Three Kingdoms period, you find yourself standing on a high, grassy bluff overlooking the grand confluence where the Minute River meets the Yangtze, near the ancient city of Diaochan. The air here carries the immense, heavy coolness of late autumn, a season when the entire natural world prepares for its long winter sleep. It is the year 280, and a profound, historic quiet has settled over the vast landscape of China. The long decades of fragmentation, the endless marches of ironclad armies, and the burning of river fleets have finally come to an end. The realm has been unified under a new name, the Han Dynasty, and the borders that once divided families, lovers, and kingdoms have vanished like mist before the morning sun. Listen closely, and through the vast, echoing silence of the river valleys, you can hear only the deep, rhythmic murmur of the great river, rolling its endless waters toward the eastern sea, a sound that has remained entirely unchanged through the rise and fall of 100 dynasties. In this final hour of our journey, intimacy takes on its grandest, most reflective form. No longer a secret weapon, a desperate shield, or rustic necessity, but an eternal stream that flows quietly beneath the grand architecture of history. As the old soldiers lay down their spears and the old weavers look out at a peaceful horizon, the people of this unified world look back upon the long storm they have survived, finding that the private connections they forged in the dark were the only things that truly endured. Imagine an old man and an old woman sitting together on a wooden bench outside a small courtyard house, high on the river bluff. He was once a northern cavalryman who marched south under the banners of Wei. She was a daughter of the southern river tribes who once rowed a skiff past the war galleys of Wu. They met in the chaotic aftermath of the final campaigns, when the walls of political rivalry were torn down by the decree of the new emperor. Look at the profound, quiet peace of their old age. His hands are stiff from old wounds and the cold winters of the frontier. Her hair is as white as the river foam. Yet as they watch the sunset stain the waters in shades of deep amber and faded rose, their shoulders touch, and they share a single, wordless look of complete understanding. They are the living survivors of an epic tragedy, the human threads that have survived the tearing of the empire. This is the ultimate legacy of intimacy in the Three Kingdoms period. It was the silent, invisible force that preserved the humanity of a generation. When the grand designs of the emperors failed, when the bronze towers fell into ruin and the silk banners rotted into the soil, it was the memory of a lover's voice, the warmth of a shared bed, and the stubborn preservation of domestic life that allowed society to heal and begin anew. The private chamber was not a retreat from history. It was the crucible where the future of the civilization was quietly protected. Let your own breathing settle into the deep, eternal rhythm of the river now. Allow all the stories we have shared tonight to wash over your mind like the gentle currents of the Yangtze. Let the images of the moonlit pavilions, the sword-guarded bridal chambers, the mountain passes, and the rustic looms blend together into a soft, comforting tapestry of the past. The great drama of the Three Kingdoms is over. The heroes and the beauties have all stepped into the shadows, and their secret whispers have been absorbed into the long silence of the earth. You are completely safe, completely at peace, far removed from the turbulence of those ancient days. The river flows on in the dark, carrying away the heartaches, the separations, and the long longings of the past, leaving behind only a profound, restorative quiet. Let the darkness fold around you like a protective canopy of silk. Let your eyes grow heavy, and let yourself drift away into a deep, dreamless sleep, held by the quiet knowledge that love, warmth, and human connection will always find a way to survive the storm. Rest now, let go, and sleep.